David Richter speaking. Calling to order the June 10th virtual meeting of the Denver Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. Hello, everyone. Thank you for those of our audience that are joining us for our meeting tonight. This is our second virtual meeting. I'm very optimistic that it will go a little smoother than the first one did. And again, this may be our immediate future, so we're all kind of committed to making order of business, which is usually the case, is we will review and approve, hopefully, the minutes to the prior meeting, which was on, I don't know, May the 10th or 13th. I hope all of the board has had a chance to take at least a quick look at it. Lee did a remarkable job in capturing the essence of a very long meeting last week, and I assure you, you can either fire me or shoot me if tonight's meeting goes on that long. So please take a minute to go through those. If you have any specific comments now would be a good time to bring them up. Otherwise, there'll be a little silence on the line for a minute or so.
I have a comment when you're ready.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Fran speaking, and this is, for me, final minutes should be as perfect as they can be. And there's a lot of decapitalization of streets and places that is not happening in the minutes. I do not want to fix these minutes, but going forward, we really need to do that.
You mean like a period after ST and stuff like that?
No, for example, Park Hill, which is both words should be capitalized, but they're not. And there's some others, you know, where you name part of a thing, but not the other. So really need to be careful with that. For example, Sloan's Lake, both should be capitalized. There's a lot of that in our minutes. And I really think that.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, it was tough last time to get it all down, but we can definitely do that.
And like I offered before, I am happy to be your editor prior, and it didn't happen this time, or I would have done accordingly.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Fran.
Mm-hmm. With that, I move that we accept the minutes as written.
Can I get a second to that, please?
A second. Marla seconds. This is Marla.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to do something. I want to use the little hand feature, not because we need it tonight for this, but for your, for your acceptance of these minutes, I'd like you to raise your virtual hand if you are in favor of approving these minutes.
I'm trying to figure out where it is again.
I'll be patient for a second because I want this to work. We don't need it.
Click on the
person,
participants, see the list, and then look at the very bottom of the participants list, and you'll see a hand and you'll see a microphone.
If you really small, it's tiny.
Yeah, very small. It's all the way at the bottom.
Oh, I got it.
There you go. Frank got a check. I don't know how did Frank do that? No,
there you go.
There we go.
The check is with the megaphone, David. So if you found the megaphone, is just left of that, the raise hand feature.
Good. Okay. And if I have captured all of those now, would you now unraise your hand if you have already raised it? Unraising mine. And all those opposed to the this version of the minutes, please raise your virtual hand. And I don't see any. If you're struggling with that, let me know. But otherwise, I will assume that that is the case, that there are none. Any abstentions from that, you may raise your hand. Okay, so these minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Before we go into the public comment, we have about, I think, 8 people signed up tonight. I want to make 2 quick comments. One, we have for the board's information, if you did not know, we do have a new board member representing Councilwoman Gilmore. We have Ms. Pam Giner, who is not with us tonight on the call or the meeting. But she was appointed recently, I think literally within the last week. And who knows, maybe she will even chime in at some point during this meeting. I don't know. But I want you to be aware that we do have a new member there. And secondly, I have I got a very distressing phone call late today from Noel Copeland, who is not on this call tonight. Noel has been very ill and has been in the hospital for about 10 days.
Oh, no.
He has now been released from the hospital. He's at home. He's doing much better, but he definitely won't be with us tonight.
No.
Apparently, he had a significant staph infection in his leg, but he's getting over it and he's doing okay. So if you have a chance in the next few days, please reach out to him and just say hi. And with that, we will go to our public comment. And our first contestant tonight will be the inimitable Katie Fisher. Katie, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome back, Katie. How you doing?
Well, thank you. I'm glad it's being aired publicly so we can. At this point, I don't have anything to say, so you can pass on to the next person.
Thank you very much. I neglected to say, and I apologize, I think many of our public speakers tonight are aware of this. We do put a 3-minute cap on your comments. And our next speaker will be Courtney DeWinter, and she's no stranger to us or our procedure. Good evening, Courtney. Thank you for joining us. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you, and hello to everyone this evening. Is the volume okay? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Sounds good.
Great. Well, so I'm Courtney DeWinter from Canada Geese Protection, Colorado, and I want to talk briefly about where we stand right now on some goose management issues. So just to reiterate some facts, $108,000 has been allocated for wildlife services in 2020 for Denver. The depredation permit to kill up to 4,000 geese in Colorado was obtained on April 9th, 2020. We don't yet know how many goose eggs were oiled this year, but we should fairly soon. And results of our own park scouting show that some geese have been disappearing from Denver parks while we're on lockdown, and we don't know why. The killing of Denver park geese is apparently commencing at the end of this month. And so the 2020 Goose Damage Management Plan states that the geese will die by, quote, humane euthanasia. And this is a real misrepresentation of what's really going to happen. When pressed on how Denver geese died last year, Kendra Cross of the Wildlife Services, who was in charge of the project, simply said they died by human hands. So I want to talk about what this really means so that it's not so sanitized. When geese are killed by human hands, people are holding them down while they're conscious, while they're struggling, while they're terrified, and they're killed in one of 2 ways. The first way is breaking their necks. People hold the struggling geese, apply pressure, and twist and bend the goose's neck until it breaks while it's conscious. The second method is decapitation. With this method, people hold the geese down and cut their heads off with a knife or a hatchet. Again, the geese are conscious as they feel the bite of the knife or the hatchet cutting into their neck.
Yeah, I do. Meet me around back.
Hello? So the body can flop around for up to 2 minutes after the head is cut off because their hearts are still pumping goose blood through the neck. Now, this is the reality of how the geese will die. And I'm just going to pose a question to the board. A, were you aware of this? And B, does this sound like humane euthanasia to you all? For this reason, we've got to stop this. Denver's a progressive city, and Denver can and must do better than this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Courtney. Our next public speaker,
Noted.
hello. Our next public speaker will be Carol Woodall. Are you with us this evening, Carol?
Yes.
Good evening. How you doing?
Okay, you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, that's good. Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to make some real quick comments. And one thing is, I just want to go back to what I've been talking to all of you about for quite a while now, is this notion of transparency and accountability. And the one thing that I would ask for you to start to consider is precisely how does discussion take place with the public that is engaged and passionate about a topic such as the Canada geese management. Does that dialogue, that transparent dialogue, actually contain a dialogue, a discussion between both interested parties? Or is it basically sort of a sense of just listening to a question being asked and then deciding whether or not and to what extent a question should be addressed? That being said, when I ended up attending the Sustainability and Resiliency Subcommittee meeting, I believe a week ago, possibly 2 weeks ago, pardon me if I don't remember the date, but the one thing that sort of was impressed upon me is the ways in which the questions were not necessarily engaged with, meaning the individuals generating the questions did not have the ability to clarify a question. The inability to clarify a question is thereby alluding to the fact that there is no kind of real sort of public engagement that's taking place. So what I ask of all of you is to seriously think the ways in which transparent dialogue is taking place with the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for your comments, and thank you for your participation and for attending that last meeting you just alluded to. Next public speaker will be Pfeiffer Brown. Pfeiffer, are you with us this evening?
Yes, I am. How are you?
Good to have you with us. I think this is your first virtual trip to the PRAB. You have 3 minutes for your comments, and the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I have had the pleasure of speaking with you guys several times in different places, and I have worked so hard to convey my thoughts, my feelings. As silly as it might seem to you guys, you know, the stuff that goes on in your heart as well with all of this stuff happening. And I've tried to explain, and I feel like I don't know if there is. I assume that there's a lack in compassion, and I understand that people have empathy in different ways, and I know that a lot of people don't understand why we are so passionate about these animals and about standing up for them and trying to work with you all take care of everyone's needs and desires. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I know we've discussed many times the simple things that we can do to change the surroundings and the environment at the park in order to take care of a lot of these issues that are coming up. And I don't have really anything new to say. I just wanted to let everybody know that I'm still here a year later, and I'm not going anywhere. I really want to continue working with you guys to come up with a solution. I don't want anybody to be unhappy. My kids, we have park shoes, and we specifically wear those park shoes to the park because we know we're probably going to step in goose poop. Nobody likes goose poop. I want to help as much as possible finding a solution on all of this. So thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you setting up this time to open a discussion for all of us.
You're welcome, Pfeiffer. And again, thank you for your participation and your comments tonight. I really appreciate it. It's clear that you mean what you say. Our next speaker tonight will be Laura Vance. Laura Vance, are you with us this evening?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I have a sore throat.
yeah, I can tell.
So
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to say much, but I just strongly oppose the killing of these geese. I saw the whole thing happen last year, or after the fact anyway, and I'm in the park every day, and I just think that we have not explored all the possibilities for dealing with it, and that's why I'm here.
Very good. Well, I'm sorry for your sore throat, and thank you for your comments very much. I appreciate it. Our next speaker tonight will be Karina Santini.
David, I don't see Corinna Santini on the attendee list. So,
shoot. Okay. Okay. All right. I think she was on there earlier, though. Is that correct?
she signed up today, but I don't see her on the list of attendees, nor do I see Kenneth Ho, who is the next person.
Really? Okay. Let's call out. Well, Kenneth Ho, are you there? Apparently not.
Yeah. And actually, James Palmer is also not on the line. I do not see his name on the attendee list.
Okay.
Of our public comment.
Yeah. Okay. It didn't occur to me that I haven't really tried to scroll through that whole list to see to vet attendance on that. I guess you can see that easier than I can. Or you're.
Yep, I'm checking on that attendee list right now.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Well, thank you. So that will conclude public comments for this evening. Thank you all for attending tonight. You're certainly welcome to stay on the line and listen to the rest of our agenda for the evening. We will transition now into our PRAB committee reports. And in no particular order, I will, I should have said, I'm trying to stay on agenda, on message tonight. So I want to limit our board announcements, our committee reports to about 5 minutes each. And if you are really looking for some feedback from anyone on any particular subject, I hope you would please try and allow a little bit of room in your 5 minutes for that. I think we'll start with the proverbial resiliency and sustainability committee, the one that Fran chairs. Are you able to speak now, Fran? Are you with us?
Sure, I'm ready.
There you go, dear.
Okay. We had the Sustainability and Resilience Committee, which is the last Friday of every month. Initially, we were going to have no panelists, but I was assured later that there was an attendee ability, and so I was able to include the people that had reached out to me. Unfortunately, the way it's set up, they could only listen but not participate. The purpose of the meeting, and I'll have Jack and Lee weigh in wherever they wish after I give the report, was to get our arms around the questions that had been raised in the last public hearing from the people that spoke, as well as the questions that were, the long list of questions that were posed to us by board member Lisa Calderon. And so all of those questions and all of those comments were very important to me. My biggest problem with it was trying to get my arms around it and understand what was going on. So the Sustainability and Resilience Committee purpose for me was to learn as much as possible from the department on how they were reacting to these questions and these statements. So in the meeting, it was agreed that Vicki Vargas, who's the head of wildlife, agreed that she would take all of those questions and give us answers. But because of the events that took place in the last 15 days with the protests and of course the COVID issues, she was not able to deliver those answers and those reports until just last night. I spoke to Scott Gilmore this morning, and those answers and all of that report will be posted on the website, if not tonight, by tomorrow. Again, some of the comments that were just made were new to me and shocking. And so again, caring about what these statements are and the public's opinion, they will be taken up at the next meeting. However, the Sustainability and Resilience Committee wants to move on to other topics as well. We have the issue of pesticides as well as water quality and being able to increase recycling. So with that, that's pretty much my report. I'll let Lee and Jack weigh in.
Well, unfortunately, I'll go ahead. I was unable to attend that meeting. I was on a little vacation, but I really think that we are working on getting all those questions answered and figuring out how we can engage with the public more on this issue. And I think that's something our committee really does take seriously. And I wanted to just say that, you know, all the public comments seem to be largely about geese these days. And they're not falling on deaf ears. We really are, as a committee, taking things to heart and listening. And we want to make the best, we want to advise the department as best as we can, but that is our only role as advisors. We don't get to make policy, we just can advise. So we're trying to do the best we can as a committee and as a board. So thank you.
Frank, did you want to add anything to this? I beg your pardon.
Fran, this is Scott.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to give you guys an update. The two documents, the Q&A and the memo, have been posted. So they are on not only the wildlife page, but they are also on the PRAB page. So you guys have access to those. So, and I truly apologize with everything going on. We just between COVID and the protests, the George Floyd protest and stuff, we've had a lot on our plate. So we did get those completed and we did get those posted. So I apologize for the delay.
All right, thank you, Scott. Jack, did you want to add anything?
210210.
Is Jack on the phone?
I think Jack isn't on the line tonight.
I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. I thought I saw him earlier. Okay, we're going to move on then to the Operations and Maintenance, Budget and Finance Committee.
Sorry, David, just wanted to let you know that Molly did have her hand raised for a question on this committee report.
Thank you for that. I didn't see. Okay, I see your comment now. Sorry. Yeah, I got to pay more attention to that. Molly, make it quick if you would, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is brief, and it's, you know, related to this committee and other committees. I appreciate that it was, the last meeting was made available to folks who have given comments before, but I still feel pretty strongly that if we're going to have these committee meetings, then we should make the information available on the website to the public so that that anyone can join, not just the folks that we've already been in contact with. I think that's just good government.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to move on to the Budget and Finance Committee. I don't think Leslie is with us tonight. Is that correct, guys? But I do see both. See both Frank and Trina. Would one of you like to fill in on Leslie's behalf if you have any report to make?
David, I can jump in. It's Frank. And Trina, you can add to it as well. We did not have a meeting last week, so we have not met since the last PRAB meeting. The business that we had worked on up until the last meeting was the white paper. And so no new business has been started, and we hope to get back together 1 week before our July PRAB meeting.
Cool. Okay. I will just put a bug in your, is that all you have to say?
That's it for me. If Trina has anything to add, have at it.
And I didn't have anything else to add since we didn't meet.
Okay. I just will put a bug in both of your ears, and then we'll move on. We need to start taking a look at the next round, the next cycle of both our recommendations to the department and or whatever we call the white paper in terms of the timing and the sequencing of all that. We're not going to wade into that right now, but I think you ought to start thinking along those lines next time you two meet, and let's try and get our hands around that greater context of synchronizing everything. Okay. Okay. Let's see, who do we have next? We have Meredith next, I guess. You're with us, aren't you, Meredith?
Hi, this is Fran.
Yes, Fran.
I have a question. I raised my hand, but something was brought up at the sustainability regarding the language that went into the portion about the transparency. And my remarks were that we were past being able to make changes because it was on its way to council. I hope I was correct in that.
Okay.
Sorry, make changes, you mean to the board, the recommendations that we made as a board?
Right. The
For that,
language,
okay.
the language
Since we already
came up with, yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure I get that right in the notes. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Meredith, are you ready with the report? Okay. Floor is yours.
Okay, great. So our team met on May 18th, and we were able to speak with Happy Haynes and Scott Gilmore. The focus was learning more about Park Hill Golf Course, but really it shifted more to learning about the acquisition plan. And so I think this was a good conversation that we were able to kind of see all of the different variables in decision making. And so looking at this year and next year's budget, all the budgets are frozen now, so they're not pursuing any acquisitions at this point until they understand what the budget outlook is related to all the budget cuts from COVID. We learned that Kathy Levesque is leading the team for acquisition strategy, and she'll be meeting with different community groups. And again, all of the acquisition will be driven and led by principles of equity and need. When Denver Parks and Rec does acquire property, they have a goal of acquiring it. They have a goal of developing it within 3 to 4 years. They're not actively pursuing any specific acquisitions. And in this past year, I believe there was one acquisition made. We also discussed briefly about planning and zoning, and if Denver Parks and Rec has a role in that, but that is really focused with City Council. Discuss large development review process, and that Denver Parks and Rec is just one of many agencies involved in that large development review process. So again, DPR would be participating, but not the lead for something like Park Hill Golf Course. Let's see. We learned that there are my notes say about 200 acres of acquired land that has not yet been developed. And it was stated that we will not use their entire acquisition fund for one parcel. And then we just had a further discussion about the different community groups that are involved with advocating for Park Hill Golf Course land. And again, our team will just continue to provide recommendations about open space and also about the specific requirements regarding large developments and the acreage that is required to be considered to stay open space. So that is my summary about that. I think there's more to come specifically about this, about Park Hill Golf Course. And but I think we have a better understanding about acquisitions for the Parks Department. So I can send that summary over to Lee and the rest of the team.
Thank you. That would be helpful. Thanks, Meredith.
I participated in that meeting, and I thought it was, at the very least, good at bringing everyone up to speed in terms of where we are. To overstate the obvious, Park Hill's not going away. I'm sure we'll hear considerably more on that subject. Anybody else have a comment on that?
This is Lynn.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify that I wasn't sure who the deciders are on Park Hill. And when Meredith said we can't spend all the money on acquisition of one piece of property, to me, that was what Happy's recommendation would be. But I don't know who's the decider of that. And in Park Hill, I would assume it's the council. So I just want to clarify the word we.
Oh.
That's all.
Florence, are you patiently waiting with your hand up?
I am. I just have a quick question also along that lines, participating on the call. I'm not sure I heard of when that long-term acquisition strategy plan was going to be completed or what the time frame was. That's my only question. If we don't have it today, I can continue to look for that. That's it.
I don't think that we have that information yet, but I will follow up with Kathy Levesque to see if I can gather more information for our team. That's all I have.
Uh-oh. David's disappeared.
David?
Are you still there, David? Nope, he's gone.
Okay. Well, I guess
Marla.
I will take over, I guess. Thank you for that committee report. Do we have other committee reports at this time, please? Yes, he's back. David, can you hear us?
I hear everyone fine, and I see myself and all of you. What's going on?
Okay, we lost you for a minute. We couldn't see you or hear you. So we're going on to the next committee report. Please.
Yes. Am I back?
Yes.
Yeah, I was. So again, sorry, I'm not sure what happened. We had a glitch there. Lisa, I see you on the screen, and I apologize. I haven't really looked to see if Tosh is there, but I'm guessing you want to proceed. Is that correct?
Yeah, can everyone hear me okay?
There you are.
Is Tosh there?
No, I've not seen her log in.
Tosh is trying to join. She is having some technical difficulties, so I'm trying to assist her with that right now.
Okay, thanks.
Are we the last committee report? Because if not, I'd like to wait a minute for her to come on.
Yeah, we are yes, you are the last, but if you think we can, if we can wait for her to, I'll wait a minute and see if we can get her on.
What I can do is I can give kind of the part that she's already heard. And then, so there's two pieces to this. We've had our outreach committee meetings for a couple of sessions now in a couple of different ways. And so one has to do with PRAB in terms of recommendations for functioning that we've heard from stakeholders. And the second piece has to do with equity. So
I'll get through these other points, and then hopefully Tosh will be on by the time we get to the equity issues that we want to raise, and especially in light of the civil unrest going on in our city.
Lisa, can you remind me, please, what committee is this? I'm sorry, I just need to make sure I get that down.
Yeah, sorry, it's outreach.
Okay, thank you so much.
Tosh and I, and along with other stakeholders, we've been having a couple of meetings, and one of our stakeholder meetings is the District 9 PRAB Advisory Committee. So even though it's specific to District 9, we have folks from across the city who are also part of that conversation, and part of one of the reasons why that they have joined that group is, quite frankly, not feeling like they have access to the other committees on PRAB, and or to Parks and Rec, or to this body. So it's with input from folks from across the city who are also part of that committee. So there's a few themes, and I will send these notes to you all as well for the record. But the first thing is they wanted to create a more effective, efficient, and respected PRAB. This issue actually came up in City Council, I think it was last week, when Councilwoman Ortega brought up using PRAB as a model for the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, or DOTI. They want to create a community advisory board like PRAB. And so that sparked a lot of discussion in City Council that PRAB is probably not exactly what we want to replicate, because there are a lot of issues. And I hope that we can get to some of those issues at some point, maybe not tonight, but we set it on the agenda. So one of the issues that under that note is they want, stakeholders would like PRAB to step up in its duty to advise on budget and policy issues. They recognize that this is an advisory body, but do not feel like it is using its influence and access to information with Parks and Rec to the extent that it could be. So that's one. The second is there's a shared vision of bringing people together across neighborhoods. They want to see a better partnership between Parks and Recreation and PRAB, like Arts and Venues has. They want to have more, want to see PRAB and Parks and Rec have a more proactive than reactive approach. A concept could be like an umbrella. PRAB could act more like an umbrella to bring together folks across neighborhoods.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Can do that.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Lisa. Could you repeat that? I didn't quite, it kind of broke up on me.
The umbrella point?
Yes, please.
So they would like PRAB or Parks and Rec to act more like an umbrella of bringing together neighborhood stakeholders, because there are different folks who are working on different things in terms of these neighborhood stewards, but they're not sharing information, not because they don't want to, but because there isn't a framework to do it. So even though there is a committee on Inc., not everybody belongs to a neighborhood association or to Inc. And so Inc. has been filling that void, but they'd like to see it much more institutionalized into the work of PRAB and or Parks and Rec. The third point is increasing community outreach and engagement. And so going back to Carol's point in public comment, that these meetings really feel more like presentations than discussions. So, community puts out their questions, their concerns, and there's no feedback back about what's going to happen with that. There's not necessarily a direct response to the questions that they have. So they want to see more of a dialogue than being talked to or being presented to. Under that third point, they'd like outreach to be multi-structured. so that there are different ways to elicit community outreach. And so, for example, I've received several texts and for people who had trouble getting on this call and knowing when it is and where the notes are and where the agenda is. And so just posting it on the website is not sufficient. I created a Facebook event. I know the Canada Geese group also made a Facebook event. So there are things that can be much more proactive to get people to engage who really do want to participate. They'd like to see kind of a more robust volunteer initiative. Again, a lot of these are active in their park system. They'd like to see it is a park system. They'd like to see it integrated. And one of those ways of integrating is having a way for volunteers to communicate with each other and feeling that, you know, you all want to hear from volunteers or even during public comment with people who agree with the positions that Park and Rec take, but not necessarily around controversial issues. So more of that community forum for volunteers for Parks and Rec is the fourth point. And then the fifth point is to reduce fragmentation. They want to know what district representatives are doing around their city. If something happens in one part of the city, they'd like to know how that might impact them in another part of the city. So around park policy issues. So that brings me to also then the equity lens. So I'm just checking to see if Tosh is on yet.
Yeah, let's, I think we may have fixed that. Tosh, can you hear us?
I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome, Tosh.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks, Arthur. And thanks, Lisa. The equity piece, just as briefly as I can make it, I think this is worthy of a whole lot more conversation. I'll say that. But I think we're at a point where COVID has nudged us into, as a PRAB, into increasing our public participation, as well as an uprising in our city that is has presented a wonderful opportunity for PRAB to really overlay and adopt the spirit of the game plan in terms of the equity that is described there. And so one of the things that I would put forth in our update is that it is a great opportunity and the perfect time for PRAB to dive into equity work. To be very honest with you, I would love that we could put forth a Black Lives Matter statement. I just don't know that we've done the work to stand behind a bold statement like that at this moment. And so part of what I would like to contribute is that we give some serious consideration to working with the consultant to draw out the pieces of the elements of the game plan and really begin to walk that. Continue to walk that through our messaging, so many of the things that Lisa just announced, and definitely our public participation, as well as developing an equity statement that we can put forth in some of those different spaces that we might be using or platforms that we might be using to communicate with the public about our meetings, where they can find the notes or the minutes for the meeting. So I'm proposing that our board think through how we might work with a consultant. We have,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I actually thought you were about to conclude. We need to move on with our agenda because we're running a little over already. But I'm really interested in what you've just raised. And I'd like to take this offline and discuss it with you and see how we might propose to get some meaningful work done on this subject rather than, frankly, I'm just trying to discuss it right now. We just don't have the time, but I'd really like to delve into that.
So that's a perfect example of the equity lens that we need. I don't know of anything right now that's more important to talk about than the unrest that's going on in our city. And part of that is for people who don't feel heard. And so I'm actually feeling not heard right now as we've raised a very important issue and we're told, but we have to move on. Essentially, we have more important things to talk about.
Lisa, I apologize, but I'm going to tell you.
I'm not done talking, David.
Your time is up, Lisa. Lisa, your time is up. I gave you 10 minutes. I
think I'm done with this.
Off at 5.
I think I'm done.
Manage your own time a little bit better here, Lisa. You need to learn to manage your own time a little bit better.
Sorry, I need to learn
Okay,
what?
I'm going to intervene here. We're going to need to call point of order. And Mr. Chairman, if you would please take control of the agenda of this meeting and we can move it forward.
Did you need something?
Thank you.
I just feel shut down as a Black woman talking about equity and Black lives. And so if you do not feel that this conversation is worthy of this,
I'll come as soon as I get a chance here.
I will,
Thank you.
I will leave and protest this meeting.
In fact, I think it is so important that we want to schedule time for it. So my apologies if you're feeling unheard. That is not the intention from me personally. And I would highly encourage us all to take a minute and find what's going to be best for this board. This is an important topic you bring up. I think we need to give it its due course, and perhaps we're not all prepared to delve into it right now, but I think we should be, and I think we should schedule that time. To your point, and I acknowledge you and appreciate you for bringing it to this board and bringing it up and taking a stand for it. So again, I don't think it's something we want to not address. I think it's something we want to take full time and preparation and make sure we're doing a thorough and good job to do it justice. So I hope that is what I've communicated and not that we don't want to talk about it, because that's not true.
Yeah, I mean, Lisa, I got to be honest with you. I sent you an email a week or two ago and told you it's like I do want to talk about it. But the committee report is not the right forum. If you want a full board discussion of it, I told you that I would allocate time for a crowd discussion of that this summer, and I will. Okay, but we need to move on with our
protests are happening now, David. This is a public forum. This is an appropriate forum, and you did shut me down as a Black woman raising a Black Lives Matter issue during a time when this whole city is challenged with not hearing people like me. Are there no white allies on this board?
Lisa, I hear you loud and clear. And I think this is an incredibly important thing that we should have done a long time ago. I wish we had spent more time at the retreat to delve into equity. I am wholeheartedly with you. I think we need to talk about things as they come up. And maybe at the end of this meeting, after we finish this part, I think maybe during those board announcements, we could talk a little bit more about what our possible immediate next steps could be.
Okay.
I would like to do that.
Yeah, I would agree with Lee. I think that we need to make time for space for things as they come up in time. And I'd agree and support Lisa and Tosh that this is really timely and something that we should have, made space for long before now.
And if you do have a statement on Black Lives Matter, maybe if during the announcement time we could discuss it, because yes, it's timely.
Okay. Again, I apologize, Lisa, if you felt like I was cutting you off. I'm trying to stay on a schedule. I've gotten a million different comments from board members about not managing our time better, And I apologize for that. And I'm happy, as I said, to discuss this with you and put together a substantive response, okay?
This isn't a discussion with me. So don't put the responsibility on me. This is a responsibility for this board. Do not white tone police me. This board needs to take up this issue as a whole body. Don't put it on Black women.
And let me add one just really quick, David, and with all due respect to all of you, I was giving an update. I was interrupted. And this issue is for me, for my everyday experience, I feel very much shut down. And at this point, just to keep my composure on this board, am excusing myself from the remainder of this meeting. For me, my house is on fire. So it is challenging if I can't even update this board, this body. I was not trying to have a full discussion. It was my committee, my part of the committee update. And so what has happened is being shut down cost us more time. By now, I would have been done. At this point, you all, please do excuse me. I can't sit here any longer with you. And if you would think about it, since January, we've had 4 or 5 PRAB members of color leave this board. And so I am leaving you all with a question, which I know you will try to figure out later because you don't have time right now. Why is that? And I think part of what I just experienced is a big part of that why. Why is that? That we've had so many, all the people who have left people of color. Why is that? Thank you all for the time that you've given.
Tosh,
thank you for
Tosh.
that. I really do want to move on.
Thank you. We got our answer. I'm also leaving in protest. White folks, do your work.
Hey, Lisa, I'm a woman of color and I don't appreciate.
And you have
putting
shut
me
me
in that
down too,
basket.
Fran. So I am done with this conversation right now.
Okay,
Leaving
sorry.
in protest, please reflect that in the minutes.
I will.
Okay.
And me as well. Please make that note. Thank you.
I will, Tosh. Thank you, Lisa.
All right.
Tosh.
Sorry,
Email me.
Tosh. Perhaps we can talk another day. Do I have, hello?
Yes, this is.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Hello, I can't hear anybody here.
We can hear you. You're good.
Oh, there you are. Okay, good. I don't know what happened. Must have flashed off. Look, we're going to move on. This is obviously a very volatile situation. I'm not sure how to handle it right this minute. We'll try and come back to it, perhaps if we have time at the end of the meeting. But I really want, Happy is the star of the show tonight, and I've got to give her time. She's got a lot on her plate. And I'm going to turn this over to the executive director for her report this month. Go ahead, Happy.
Florence has her hand up.
I will save my comments because the only comment I had is, and
What's going on?
Florence, you muted yourself.
okay,
There you
am
are.
I
We
unmuted?
could hear you, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I did put my hand up and I thought we were trying to go through using the hand raising process. So, but just David, I know you want to move the conversation forward, but just so that you know, that you still have women of color part of this conversation to continue the conversation. And I do look forward to having set up something so that we can have the conversations that we need to have, especially around equity. I mean, it's critical and it's always been part of our conversation. If we have to reframe it differently, let's do it. But again, this is all relevant and it ties back to not only to what we're experiencing as a nation today, but also as it relates to the game plan that we're implementing. So it's critical in every aspect. So with that, I just want you to know that you still have some voices here at the table that are very concerned and willing to move forward with the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, again, I apologize. Happy, give me 1 second since Florence addressed that. It's like I heard some of the things that Lisa started off with about trying to integrate some of these concepts of equity into the principal components of game plan. And I thought that was an excellent idea. But again, we need to table that for tonight. I'd love to put together a substantive a committee to flesh out something for the board to discuss in detail. But I just don't have time to do that tonight. But I appreciate your comments, Florence. And Happy, you have the floor.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Hey, you're on the screen even. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's appropriate for me to start out where this conversation left off. And I guess there are times when we need to stay focused, follow our agenda, and there are times when we need to focus on critical issues that that are that supersede the normal business. And with all due respect to you, Mr. Chair, I do think this issue of where we are in this community and this question of equity probably supersedes certainly anything that I have to share with the group today. So I'm going to be extremely brief in my response because I will have an opportunity to present it to you in paper and allow this body, this is your meeting, and so to determine what you think is most important to discuss this evening. And so to allow to come back to this topic as you wish. If Arthur will pull the document that we have in front of you, there actually are some issues related to this topic of equity that we would want to highlight as a part of the conversation. And then I'm going to pull it up on my screen.
Okay, so is this something we can scroll through, or are you kind of in control of that?
I'm not in control of it. Arthur is.
Okay.
And so what I'm is, without going through the details of this document, is just briefly describe what's contained therein. I may dwell a moment or two on a couple of highlights, and then I'll turn it back over to you for the board to have the conversation that you would want to have. So I'll start out with the COVID crisis. And in response to several of the questions that related to our budget and the idea of increasing certain activities in the department, access and use of our resources, and then a specific question about maximizing access due to the impacts of COVID and the desire of people who've been cooped up in their homes for what seems like months to be able to use our parks. And so we gave just a very brief, but I think point response about the reality of our budget situation, not only immediately, but for the foreseeable future, including next year's 2021 budget. I think the sum of that is that the likely scenario, rather than expanding and adding, is going to be a situation where we're going to be reducing and potentially subtracting services and even potentially staff. So I think the role of PRAB is going to be really important as we continue to move through this process, and particularly from an equity lens. So if we're facing, reductions, we want to be sensitive to where those impacts are going to be felt most, and that I think is going to be an ongoing conversation with all of you, and I'll give you an example of one of those. We will be facing some potential service reductions. We're going to want, again, from an equity perspective, to department, how do we minimize those impacts in communities that are underserved, and will the we will look to have some ideas about how to do those reductions in a way that has less impact on the communities that we know are already underserved, and quite frankly, even are suffering even greater impacts from the overall situation of an economy that is suffering. That being said, we do point out in this some of the additional steps we did take through the crisis, knowing that these were going to be important, including while public restrooms were closed because of our inability to keep them sanitized and cleaned, we have added portalets and hand washing stations throughout our park system, and they will remain there for the foreseeable, until we have defined what a sort of post-COVID new normal is. And I think as we think about what those solutions are, getting the PRAB's advice and feedback about our proposed solutions will be very much in order and appreciated. We want to quickly we've quickly summarized some of the activities that the department has been involved in through this crisis, including the fact that while a lot of our employees, because of closures, were not working, many of those, over 250 of those employees, have been redeployed to cover other activities, some of which included other activities in the department, and some of which were our share, our contributions to the city's overall efforts to help keep the city afloat, which included providing childcare to first responders and frontline medical staff, providing transportation to temporary emergency shelters, delivering shelter meals, patrolling our parks and helping the many people who sought respite in our parks remember how to do that safely with distancing and other requirements, keeping our amenities closed because they were not safe, such as playgrounds and picnic areas. We were responsible for managing the donations for personal protective equipment on behalf of the city. So our Parks and Recreation Department, I have to say, I'm very proud of the way they have stepped up in this crisis to help not only within other assignments within our department, but to help the city overall in managing the situation.
Happy, can I ask you a quick question? The shelter transportation and the childcare aspects of this, are we using rec centers for that or other city resources?
We are using recreation centers for childcare. We used recreation centers for a short period of time for shelters. Those have been closed, and we're using other more appropriate facilities in the city for shelters, but we are still involved in supporting those shelter operations through transportation and meal delivery.
Okay, thank you.
And so I'm moving on to the question number 4 about access to our municipal golf courses. We provided a response around the nature of our golf course enterprise fund and the need to generate income. I think it's fair to say, and I think I responded initially with early on in this crisis, we were facing the potential of literally the collapse of our golf enterprise fund because it relies entirely on that's generated through golf, and since it's opened, we are at least moving towards recovery of that operation and that fund. It is not out of the woods. So essentially the response is, because it has to cover all of its expenses with the revenue it generates, the focus has got to be on reopening of those courses primarily to golf and to the revenue that will keep those facilities in operation. And so the allowing closing those courses to golfers to allow access to the general public has a significant negative budget impact that could cause the enterprise fund to go into a negative cash situation and potentially collapse. And secondly, that the idea of having the general public on golf courses when they're in operation creates a significant safety issue that would prevent us from providing those as a source for just regular park use. And again, I'm going through these quickly because we'll provide the document to you. You can pour over them, and then we can have greater conversation perhaps at a later time. I think the response on the purchase of the Park Hill Golf Course, I gave a preliminary response at the last meeting, and I think it was summarized in the committee report earlier this evening. Well, and we added a few more points here. I had mentioned last time that by the way, the question was who was the decision makers on the we, and the we that I referred to in saying we would not want to spend all of the current acquisition funds is we as a department. It is our responsibility to propose how to spend these. The final, obviously, the final decision makers on all of the expenditures in this department for anything is the mayor and city council. But that we are, we have the responsibility of bringing those proposals to the mayor and city council, just both through our budget, through our capital program, and through our operations. So when I mentioned that we would not want to use all of the acquisition, it's the department would not be recommending or bringing forward a recommendation to spend all the entire amount on one single parcel. And I think we go into a little detail here where what our focus is for acquisition, which includes, looking at opportunities across the city to address access issues, to address equity issues, and a number of considerations and across the city. And so I'll let you look at those. Those were the reasons primarily why we would not want to spend all of those acquisition dollars on one single parcel. However, I think it makes clear that we would be very interested in a significant amount of acreage at the golf course, and being at the table for advocating for that parkland. It is in an area that would be targeted by our access and equity principles as a park desert, and so it certainly would rise to the top and part of our list of strong considerations for using some of those acquisition dollars. We think there are more ways than simply buying the property that will potentially provide opportunities for us to secure land on that site to meet park needs in that neighborhood. And it may include park designations that would be required as a part of an overall development process. Or certainly there may be an opportunity to provide some dollars and to use some of those acquisition funds to secure some of that land. So I'll move on to the next item. And by the way, if you're looking at this document, the questions or the points from the PRAB are in blue, and the responses from the are in black, just so that you can distinguish. I'll just say one last thing. We continue to be engaged in this process to advocate for substantial open space at the Park Hill Golf Course site, and that I think is a recognition here that the community is going to lead this. It will not be our department. What happens there will be part of the community process, and we stand ready to participate in that and be engaged, whether it's through acquisition or other means of acquiring open space. Question number 6 about the pilot cooperative relationship with DPS. I think I also mentioned this initially at the last meeting, that we very much believe in the building and strengthening the relationship with DPS. it doesn't need to be a pilot because we already have an existing relationship. Our response gives a little bit of background about that relationship, that existing relationship, and what we currently share with Denver Public Schools, both in terms of facilities, buildings, as fields and other facilities, on the part of, and as well in terms of programming. So through the My Denver program, through some of the after-school programming that our recreation department is very much involved in, shared facility agreements that we have both with some of our athletic facilities and with a number of other agreements. So what we wanted to do is to continue. We believe that this is a relationship that can always be strengthened, and particularly with regard to the 10-minute access. The school grounds, playgrounds that are referred to as learning landscapes was a collaboration between Denver Public Schools and the city and a number of private funders initially. We've had a number of discussions with the district and with other entities interested in sort of doing the next iteration of that learning landscapes idea. What's next? We have a very, very great interest in increasing the actual natural areas, nature play and other opportunities in DPS playgrounds. And so we're continuing there. I think it's an area where getting the PRAB involved in those discussions and helping to advocate for the sort of next generation of schoolyards. This is a huge movement across the country of using and leveraging schoolyards to add open space access in particular neighborhoods. So still lots of room for improvement on that the existing relationship, and I think some exciting opportunities coming up in the next years that we will certainly engage the PRAB in as we move forward. Moving on to question number 7 about the closure of streets in the parks that occurred. It was one of our sort of emergency responses during the COVID crisis. I think it was partially an answer to question number 3 above, which was how do we provide more access? And closing the streets was one of those responses. It was an emergency response under the COVID emergency declaration that the mayor has declared. Ordinarily, we would not take an action like that sort of quite so unilaterally. That, closing streets and roads in parks have grave implications for a lot of stakeholders. And so considering those as permanent closures is something that we think needs to be a more thoughtful process, and not in the midst of this crisis. But we think we have learned a lot from how the parks have functioned with these streets closed. There are some challenges, both in terms of access and in terms of impacts on neighborhoods. And so as we move forward, we definitely want to engage in this conversation, but our response and recommendation is that this is a process that would be sort of post-crisis. The good news is as the recovery is progressing and things open up more and more activities get back closer to normal, I think starting that conversation will be very much in. In addition, there were other street closures, not only in parks, but as you know, our colleagues in the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, DOTI, also closed some streets for the same purposes, to provide greater access and more relief to the public. So we are going to be collaborating with DOTI in a fairly a sort of community conversation, a stakeholder process about what's next. What have we learned? Closures. Are there streets that can remain closed? What would be the implications? Where and which ones? And so there's a lot to be considered. We intend to be a part of that. Use what we've learned during this crisis to help guide our thinking. As I mentioned earlier, definitely we will want to keep the PRAB very much engaged in that process. And in the larger citywide stakeholder process, we will certainly be recommending that there be PRAB representatives as a part of that broader conversation around street closures.
Sorry to interrupt, but could you just give me a little insight as to how your department, in consideration of what you've discussed with Dodie, how does that interaction between your department and them work? I don't really have a feel for that. You understand my question?
I guess I'm not sure. We will jointly plan for a community, a planning process, a stakeholder process that will include individuals from multiple city agencies and community members around the issue of street closures, both in parks and in other streets that are part of the transportation system. Does that make sense? That it'll
Yes, it does. It does. Yeah.
DOTI will be leading this effort, but it'll be a joint process with Parks and Recreation, with the planning office, and probably with safety. So it not unlike other multi-agency processes that that are multidisciplinary. These are issues that are not just parks issues. They're not just transportation issues. They're not just safety issues. They sort of cut across all of these disciplines, and so it'll be a multi-agency, multidisciplinary process where we will have a role as a department, and therefore the PRAB, as a part of the stakeholder process, a role as well.
David, this is Lynn. I am confused. Is this an answer to our white paper? Because Happy keeps saying I'm answering questions, but the white paper was not questions. The white paper was statements of philosophy that the board was recommending. So I'm confused.
I put them as questions, but it is the white paper. It's what's up on the screen, and
yeah, I see it on the screen.
The items in
blue. The white
are
paper was guiding our thinking. I thought the white paper guided our thinking over the next year. And so I'm confused why we're doing this at all. I just don't know. I'm lost here. Are you just answering us that these are the things we can and can't do, or
this is our initial this is your set of recommendations to us. And so we're responding with our thinking about those issues and what we think is next.
Yep. And so Lynn, I can clarify a little too. I think it was initially called the white paper, and we had some discussion about that last month. And at this point, it was recommendations to the board, or excuse me, to the executive director. So they might be our guiding principles, but they're actually recommendations to the executive director. And it was asked last month during the meeting to have a written response to those recommendations that we have made. So I think that's where this
I
comes
say
from.
questions, but it's the recommendations.
Yeah.
Well, simply put, since this last set of recommendations was not necessarily the way we've approached white papers in the past, I think hearing the department's response to that isn't inappropriate. I mean, again, it's like we asked some fairly specific bullet issues, and I'm intrigued and pleased to get this kind of feedback.
Yeah, and
Obviously there will be more on all of these topics.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say on some of the recommendations, our response is we don't think that, for example, on the golf courses, that we can go there. On others, we think very much that there's more to do, and we agree with the thrust of the recommendations, and what I've tried to briefly outline is where those next steps will be and how we'll be continuing to engage the PRAB in those actions, conversations, and processes.
I have a question about the streets in the parks. So Dottie is opening more streets. They just announced some additional shared streets that they're opening. I'm wondering if you can confirm that the streets and parks will remain open to people through the summer?
Yeah, so yes, and then I think our comment here is we are maintaining most of the current street and parking lot closures for the foreseeable future. We have had to make some adjustments because of some, those were emergency actions, and they created some problems, as usually happens when you do something immediately without a lot of assessment and process. We had some ADA considerations that made us to make some adjustments. So by and large, the street closures and the parking lot closures that we acted will remain in place for, and I'm sort of like through, I believe it will probably be for the next several months, and it's sort of until we start getting back to a more normal operation. And I will say that we will not go back to opening streets or whatever before we have the opportunity to engage in these conversations. Yeah, so does that,
thank you.
seem clear? We very
that does.
That the conversation about should we keep some of these streets closed is in order, and we want it to be a strategic, thoughtful process, and we will not reopen them. If the whole point is to have a conversation about whether we should keep them closed, that wouldn't make any sense. And so we will keep them closed to enable this larger stakeholder process about which ones and whether the streets should remain closed, and what the implications and impacts would be, and who's affected, and getting to a long-term decision. But in the meantime, we will keep them closed.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I look forward to being a part of those discussions.
Yeah, and we'll very much want to engage the I anticipate probably that the planning committee having, a couple of sessions on that. We will bring some of our colleagues. So, because as I said before, the implications are beyond just how a park functions. There are how these roads fit into the overall mobility system of the city, how they impact neighborhoods, with regard to parking issues and so on. So I mean, the issues are complex. How they relate to safety considerations, all of those are part of that longer conversation. But I anticipate a robust involvement and conversation with PRAB around those issues. Moving on to recommendation number 8, and thank you, Lynn, for the clarification, because these are not questions, they are the recommendations around management methods, communication on and engagement on wildlife management. So we gave a little background on how we do that work. Vicky's work as the head of our wildlife management. A broader picture, it is not just about geese, and how we go about that work. And a couple of examples of how we have engaged in the past with other communities on other issues. And I think just a continuing, you saw the follow-up response from Vicky to the PRAB following last month's meeting on our next set of recommendations around the geese. So it is an ongoing process of engaging the PRAB and the resilience committee, not only with geese, but overall. And one of the things we recommend is that on a, at least a periodic basis throughout the year, that the PRAB committee gets an update on wildlife management in general, what the issues are that are surfacing, and how we're are managing those issues. The recommendation 9 around the broadcast or some other audiovisual broadcast of the meetings. As I indicated last month, we believe that Channel 8 is going to be a challenging response, but we agree in principle with the principle that is articulated here by the PRAB, that providing greater access and transparency through using technology is a great idea. Obviously, it's sort of just like this COVID crisis. The silver lining in this crisis, if you can call it that, has been actually testing this idea. And while X may not be the perfect platform, it certainly I think has indicated to us the opportunities for providing greater audiovisual coverage of PRAB meetings. We think there's much more more conversation with the PRAB about what our solution would be, but we thoroughly agree in principle with the idea of engaging technology in a way to provide some broadcast on some platform and allowing greater access to our PRAB meetings. The equity not question, but recommendation is couldn't agree more. And I know that the PRAB was scrambling at the last meeting to make sure that it was reflected in as these recommendations, and had to settle on a very brief sentence, which I think actually captured the the priority of the PRAB well. And certainly we agree with that wholeheartedly. I think what we attempted to do with this, and again, these are responses that continue the dialogue on these topics. They are not the conclusions. I think a good clarification again to Lynn's points and questions earlier. These are this is a dialogue or a conversation, and this is our initial response. I think you can see from these responses that there are certainly next steps and for both the department and the PRAB to go. What we did here was outline again for the PRAB our agreement on how an important a priority that equity is by spelling out from our game plan and some of the actions we have taken past to agree that this equity frame is an important one and a strong priority for us as well. So this is this outlines just some of the activities and some of the documents that underscore the importance of equity as a principle to guide our actions. And it includes the game plan, how we capture our data, our involvement in the Mayor's Race and Social Justice Initiative. One of the I don't think got included in this response also was that as a city in our budget process, there is a formal equity lens that every agency has to include as a part of submitting its budget. And so framework, and that is, and maybe that's what this is. So the Mayor's Race and Social Justice Initiative, I think the budget equity framework. And so these questions about how, what our budget reflects and represents and how it impact on specific groups and neighborhoods is a formal part of the budget process. So just again, articulating some of these ideas. And then finally on the studies for the restoration of historic structures, again, already have taken some preliminary steps, still a bunch to do. We're actually in the process already of an inventory and a system assessment of our historic resources and assets, so that we can, proceed along the lines of what is recommended here, which is where do we go next and what steps do we need to take to ensure that we're maintaining, preserving, protecting, and restoring when resources are available, these valuable historic assets. So that's, I took longer than I had intended, but that's just a summary. Again, we will get this sent out to all of you and certainly welcome any thoughts, questions. I anticipate just be the first of many steps as we move throughout the year with these reflected as some of the priorities for the PRAB moving forward.
Yeah, I apologize, Happy. I'm not sure what's going on right now. Can the rest of the board see all this text? I can't. When we got down to this really good stuff on equity, all of a sudden it's kind of blacked out or checkered out. I can't see everything.
Yeah, I think that's okay, but I don't think any of us can see it, but we got the gist.
Yeah, okay, all right. And so again, Happy, is this going to be, can you email this document to us so we can, okay. And again, I reiterate, I think almost with every point that you came to, it's like you're agreeing to involve the PRAB in more dialogue on a lot of these concepts. And I want to use our committees to be the focal point. The committees themselves can be constituents of multiple committees. It doesn't matter. But again, we really do want to be playing a more active role in a lot of these.
Absolutely. By the way, the question came up earlier on the acquisition question about when what our timeline is and what.
Oh yeah, the long-term timeline.
So we have strategic acquisition plan scope of work is just in draft form. And we Kathleen will probably have an opportunity to bring it to the PRAB committee. Our intention, our next step would be we're using that draft scope of work to get our consultant team on board. Our anticipation is that we would start that this summer. And we would anticipate having a PRAB representative on the advisory committee for the plan. And so it's her intent to bring that plan process and the scope of work to the PRAB committee very soon. I think we're within a couple of weeks of having that draft available, so we will we'll be able to get it to in front of a PRAB committee for consideration fairly soon. And as we indicated earlier, acquisitions, like many of our other expenditures at this point in 2020 are sort of in a holding pattern, given the effect on the city's revenues and budget. And so we are not, with a couple of exceptions that were already in the queue and moving forward through the process, very small, mostly technical acquisitions, key ones, but outside of that, while we continue to do the work of looking at potential sites and continuing to work on where our equity map says, we have needs, etc. We are not actively engaging in acquisition transactions currently.
David, what committee would that be?
It's the planning committee. You guys are on, the committee members has come to present to a couple of times. I forget the name of the committee, but those of you who interacted with Kathleen can say what committee that is.
Yeah, that's Merida's committee, right?
Yes. Yeah. Planning and design.
Planning and design. There you go.
So that'll be available in the next 2 weeks?
Well, we think roughly, yeah. So 2 weeks or so. I have to say, my timelines are always with a caveat, because we're still in a sort of emergency operations mode, where our normal work gets set aside for the very important work that we're engaging in now of how do we start our recovery operations, and are some of our facilities going to be reopening? What that process is, and I'm so glad actually if I can shift for a moment to that conversation. We're in a process now in the city where we have moved from what we call emergency operations dominated, which was sort of where our street closures were a part of that process, into what is considered long-term recovery planning, focus, providing more time, more involvement of the community, more input, more organizations and partners, helping us think through. I will say that everything that we're doing along those lines of long-term recovery planning are driven by a set of principles and lines established not only by the city but the state health department. We're using the data to say when things are safe and what public health guidance there is for when it's the right time to begin to recover some of our activities. As you all know, this past week, we just as an example, we reopened some of our facilities, our tennis, basketball, some of our outdoor facilities, and relaxed the original restrictions on shared use equipment, which was very much a part of controlling the spread of the COVID disease. We are in a little bit different place now from a public health perspective of still wanting to focus on not spreading the disease, but it is also because of greater capacity in testing and some stabilization in the hospitalization and other health indicators. We're able to begin to think about reintroducing or reopening. So those are that was the first group this past week. Our department is working on another set of plans for the next several months, several weeks. Have some PRAB, I think, involvement in some of those discussions based on risk assessments and what things we should do next and where the public demand is. So we think there are going to be some opportunities definitely as we're in recovery planning to take deeper breaths and to actually gain some input from PRAB and from others in the community around next steps.
Yeah, we would definitely like to be involved with that. Earlier, Lisa,
sharing with you a brief outline of our thinking around the outline of what we think are the next steps and a very rough timeline about when those could happen, knowing that they can only occur when we've been given the go-ahead from the governor's office and the public health orders.
Lisa had mentioned something earlier about a Facebook page or something about how we transmit information to the public, and particularly in your dynamic world of trying to reopen things. I know you probably have allocated as many volunteer and ranger resources as you can to, not to mention to post on your website. But again, I think it's important going forward that we find additional ways to keep the public in the loop on what is opening and what is allowed now, or You understand what I'm saying of how we roll the stuff out.
Yeah, well, so I would say this, that up to this point in time, largely all communications around recovery efforts and around the COVID crisis have been managed citywide. So we are not sending out our own separate communications. We may send them out on the heels of, but all communications around COVID response and recovery come from our emergency operations and from the long-term recovery committee, which is a citywide committee. So I think they've tried to employ social media. They've tried to, they certainly have used the regular media in communicating steps. And so to some extent, we'll still be, as it relates to the recovery, we'll still be a part of that citywide effort.
David, for others who are looking, I just checked on the Denver Parks and Recreation Facebook page, and they have been keeping people up to date with like pickleball, basketball, swimming pool closures on the Denver Parks and Recreation Facebook page. And like Happy said, it's not originating from Denver Parks and Recreation. It's originating from the City and County Denver government page, but they're re-Facebooking it within moments.
Hi, this is Meredith. I just wanted to give some feedback about communications. So I've also seen the social media posts. I've seen some next door posts. I think it would be valuable to also have some non-paper signage up in parks, because if people are going to parks, there's been a lot of confusion about what is open, what's not. Sometimes people have been taking down the caution tape, and then someone doesn't see the caution tape, so then they are on the playground. So for example, Crestmore Park is covered up in caution tape, but then I was at Mayfair Park today, no caution tape on the kids on the playground. And so I think if people aren't really paying attention to social media, then the parks are where they're gonna get, if they're at the park, then I think appropriate signage.
So just, I agree entirely, and we are working on that. Here's the part of the challenge that we face with this recovery process is that the process starts with, and this hasn't always been the case, by the way, through the crisis. There was, at least initially, some conflict between what the city was doing and what the state was doing, and it created lots of confusion. We are aligned now, so our local city orders follow, piggyback on, and sometimes elaborate further, and quite frankly, sometimes differ, but only so the city can make more stringent requirements under the state order, but not less. So we can't allow things to happen that the governor's office and the state health department have not okayed. What's happening with playgrounds is an example. The caution tape, we have, I tell you, I have a roll of it in my car, and I can't tell you how many times I have reinstalled caution tape on playgrounds because taken it upon themselves to sort of set their own rules, even though the signs clearly say they're closed and the reasons why. Now, what has happened, unfortunately, is that people have read the governor's plan that said playgrounds can open, and so they just assume, well, that's, we just haven't gotten around to taking the tape down or whatever. The fact is playgrounds are still closed, and that we will post them with upgraded signage as we move forward. And part of the reason is what people like to ignore, the fine lines. The governor said playgrounds could reopen, but they have some guidelines that are very, very difficult, if not impossible, for our city to meet. which is playgrounds should open if you can keep them cleaned and sanitized, and you can do this and you can do that. We are not in a position to clean and sanitize 150 playgrounds. We don't have the capacity, the staffing, or the supplies. And cities may be just ignoring that, because I have to believe that no city has sufficient cleaning supplies to actually clean and sanitize after daily or even hourly use on a playground. However, we are working on our plan for reopening, and there will be some caveats attached to that, and we are going to re-sign. So you'll see signs at our tennis and basketball, the facilities that we're reopening will come with upgraded and updated signage about the use. For example, it limits up to 10 people. We're challenged with enforcing those, but at least we're giving the public guidance on how those facilities should be used. And we will do the same with playgrounds. That is likely to happen within the next few weeks. So we'll get a document out of you that gives us sort of a rough time frame and what our thinking is about the different facilities based on our risk assessment of them, and then what we're thinking about when they may come back online, and solicit feedback from you about ideas on how to do that, probably within the next few days.
Awesome.
Okay.
Happy, I do have a question about pools. I've had several people ask me if we anticipate the pools being open this summer at all. But lots of people ask about that.
No, and there's a perfect example of the governor's office saying, yes, we could do that under, again, under very unrealistic scenarios. The governor's office, for example, said, well, you can do it if you can do these things. And those, like separating locker rooms from your shower facilities. And we said, so who on the governor's staff or the public health department have ever been in one of these facilities? Because that's, right. And we will tell you that in the work we're doing across the country and the CDC, nobody wants to say no to the public, but we will tell you that in our risk assessment, those are some of the highest risk facilities for spreading contamination and maintaining safety. Yep. So, as well as our indoor recreation facilities for obvious reasons, running around behind people and wiping off equipment. And, there are lots of touch surfaces. And there are lots of places where prolonged proximity to other people will be a challenge. And so we're responding based on what we think we can manage, not the sort of blanket, yeah, you can open pools. The short answer to your question is we don't know. Hope that maybe by the end of summer we'll be able to introduce some limit. But it is just hard to say at this time.
Thank you.
And that, just so you know, the pools and the indoor recreation facilities are the last to open, so they're in the highest risk category, and therefore, as we phase in recovery, they will be the last facilities.
Well, so with that in mind, Happy, are the employees furloughed or laid off, or what is happening with the employees during this time that we don't have the rec centers open?
So for the first couple of months, all the employees in the city were covered through administrative leave. Have for a portion of our recreation employees who were not working because of closures, they have been on furlough, and that will be for the next not quite couple of months. We still have recreation staff working full time. They're doing a variety of task redeployments within the department to help keep things afloat, including working at some of our golf courses, working in parks facilities, supporting our horticulture program, a number of the places in the department that have been affected by the severe budget crisis and the fact that we were not able to hire all of the staff that we normally hire to do all of the work out there in the field. And we also have some of those employees working on the recovery planning process so that they're prepared when we are ready to open under a very different normal. Like, what does it mean to actually check people in? How many people, what are the restriction activities? How are we going to manage those? There's a lot of details that we've got staff working on.
Happy, I know we could all ask questions related to COVID and reopening all night long, frankly. Is that pretty much wrap up your presentation for this evening? Okay.
If there are no more questions, that was it.
And Meredith makes a good point. If there are more questions for Happy, she's happy to gather them by email and then forward them on, if that's okay with you.
Thanks, Meredith.
I'm reading your comment for you.
Marla, go ahead.
So I think at this point we're at board announcements, and I don't want to leave the meeting without making some arrangements for scheduling a conversation around our equity and diversity conversation. And I know there's a lot of interest, and we do want to have that conversation. And so I take recommendations at this point. I feel like we need and should include Lisa and Tosh, and since they're not here, I would reach out to each of them. I can commit to doing that.
Yeah, what I don't work. This is Lynn. Is just having offline conversations. I think it needs to be somehow in a conference call or the board as a whole, not just everybody calling David, because then we can't hear what Tosh is saying and be supportive of whoever.
And Marla, this is Trina. I think as well, it needs to be timely. To Lisa's point, I think it can't wait. So the conversation needs to be set, I would say soon, very soon.
Okay, noted.
I agree with that. I'm wondering if we could schedule a special meeting. We only meet once a month and we have a very short amount of time. I think this is worth a full board discussion before our next meeting.
I agree. And Molly, to piggyback on that, I think it's important that we have a facilitator.
I think this is Florence. I think we also need to frame the conversation before having it. And I'm not sure what's creating the feedback, but I noticed in the last several speakers, there was some feedback here is making it difficult to. But first, I really do think we need to frame the conversation and include the discussion points before having it so that we do come prepared with some thoughts as well as to how we move forward with, the different actions and topics related to this.
This is Fran.
Go ahead, Fran.
While I got the drift that Lisa and Tosh were reporting for the outreach committee, it sounds like it's become bigger than that. So while I understood pretty much what they were saying, they were throwing a lot at us at once. And for every point that was made, I wanted to understand more. Unfortunately, it was taken wrong because we needed to move on with the agenda. And I'm in agreement with whoever it was that made the remark that we should have a special meeting. And I think it should be within the week. But if we can somehow get all of these points that were made by Lisa and Tosh before us so that we can be thinking about them. And it almost sounds like we need to have an arbitrator or something that kind of coordinates the discussion, and not necessarily David as the chair, kind of like what we do at the retreat. It's just that a lot of these reports are coming at us. We're not getting stuff, and that includes me, before our members, and the other members that are hearing the reports are trying to catch up or trying to understand what's being said.
Okay, thanks for that. So what I hear, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm done.
I would just say, I can't speak for Lisa and Tosh, but I would disagree that with the idea that what they said was not clear or was maybe misunderstood. I think we've gone well over time in the agenda already tonight, and I really understand why they were feeling so unheard at that point in time, and I think we should definitely acknowledge that.
And I agree with Molly as well. To me, it was clear. I think they're looking for what is the statement, what is the voice of the board related to the turmoil that's happening within our city and our country right now.
Right. And also, how can we have meetings where we don't ever get to say anything? I think that's part of the frustration as well, that we always say we'll do it later and we don't. And so I think having time to talk, and if a facilitator helps, that's great, is really important. Time to talk and discuss.
Right, and this is Fran again. I wish to clarify that it wasn't that I didn't understand. It was just a lot to take in, and with everything that was said, there needed to be deeper discussion. So I did not disagree with anything that was said. I was just going, gosh, we should be having a whole forum on this, and it ought to be right away.
Okay, thanks for all that. I think what I'm hearing is that we need to call a special meeting, and we'd like to have the information from Tosh and Lisa prior to that, and anyone else's kind of input. And the request is to have a full discussion as a board with the goal of coming up with a statement. Is that right?
That's my understanding, and I think that would be so. Our superintendent came out with a statement for Denver Public School in support of what's going on and acknowledging the trauma and the emotions that may be felt throughout our district.
Yep, I did that for my organization as well. So
Marla, is this part of that bigger conversation as well? This could be one piece of it, but didn't we talk about, even at the last meeting, that bigger discussion on equity around equity? So I don't know if is it a separate discussion or is it tied together in coming up with that statement?
And I would say it's separate in that equity and socialized racism is two different things. They intersect, but it's still something that needs to be more immediate around this issue, and then equity tags on with it.
This is Leslie, and I'm sorry, horribly sorry I missed whatever happened before I got on. I had to pick up one of my kids tonight, but it sounds to me as though there's equity issues regarding how we conduct our meetings, but also there's some really short-term issues that we need to discuss in terms of this current Black Lives Matter movement and how it intersects with Denver Parks and Recreation, particularly in terms of what happens in Civic Center Park and what happens within Liberty Park. Because it's my understanding that peaceful protesters in both of those parks are being attacked by our own DPD. And I would like to know things like how our rangers are interacting with that situation and how much expense Denver Parks and Recreation takes on in these moments. And I feel like those issues might be separate from issues that we had maybe a month ago regarding whether our subcommittees have public access and those sort of equity issues. And again, I so much regret not hearing the first part of this meeting, but I'm wondering if Happy is still on this meeting, if you could quickly address, Happy, what we're spending in terms of Denver Parks and Recreation, in terms of what's happening now with the Black Lives Matter movement, and to what degree we're supporting attacks on peaceful protesters and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I am still on, and I do have some suggestions about maybe how we can support your next steps. But just a very quick response. In two regards. One is our rangers have not been engaged at all with any of the protest activities. We have specifically not assigned them to that to activities. I will say we will be engaging either ranger or someone overnight in Civic Center Park. We have sustained significant damage to the park. So I will tell you, we've spent a lot of money on addressing damage to the park. We have all expended resources in support of the activities there, the protests activities, including accommodating and providing access to power and so that they had sound for some of the events that have occurred. We have added portalets to accommodate some of the large crowds. And clearly we have spent a lot of time, a significant amount of overtime with our employees in cleanup operations. The good news is we've also had very significant of public support for the park. And again, not by individuals who are very much supporting the Black Lives Matter movement and protests, but who have also come out in very large numbers to provide support to the cleanup of these facilities. The immediate response. So we have not had any additional engagement other than that.
You mentioned you had some feedback around how we could approach this as a.
Yes. So suggestion. Just so next, I've heard that there's a desire to have an immediate meeting set up. Of course, we will support you in helping you to do that if you need it. It's your meeting, so you can decide how you want to call the meeting. But we certainly provide support to you in that effort. I think the suggestion of a facilitator is a wise one. We can certainly support you in that effort too. There obviously there are likely to be resources needed for that purpose, and we're certainly while we are severely resource constrained at the moment, this is I think as was stated by a number of people, probably the most important conversation that we need to be having. And so we will find whatever the resource support you in that regard of securing a facilitator. And it may even suggest there may be people within the city who are involved in the work in our race and social initiative itself that may be able to support you. So we'll connect you with those individuals, and then you can make the decisions yourselves about which way you want to go, and when you want to have it and what support you need from us. And we'll do our best to help support you with that. I might suggest the meeting is recorded, and so if you do engage a facilitator, I think it would be a strong recommendation of facilitator actually review the recording of the meeting so they can get the gist of what I think started out as the report committee that that was given in the context. That's the way I was reading the report from both Tosh and Lisa. A report from that committee that was given in the context of this situation, and a very important context that needed to be part of the consideration. And so I think a facilitator may have some suggestions about how to go about this conversation. And I assume that part of that will have to be addressing the issues that the two of them expressed about feeling unheard.
Absolutely.
And not everybody in the group was on the same there. That's part of the process. And so I think going through the recording of the meeting will help a facilitator understand the dynamics and be able to suggest a way forward.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I missed the first part of this meeting. But can I ask Happy, and you don't need to have an answer for me right now, but if we could start compiling statistics regarding ranger interactions with people of color versus non-people of color. I'm really concerned with our downtown parks that there is an inequity. And I don't know if it starts with our rangers and finishes with the DPD, or where it starts, but I feel like there's an inequity in our park system regarding arrests of people of color versus white people. And I wonder if we can either compile or already existing statistics of ranger interactions with people of color in our downtown parks. But trying to bring this back to our current issue of Black Lives Matter, I'm very concerned about how we might in our parks be contributing to these awful situations with bad interactions of people of color. And a lot of them I'm concerned are happening in our parks. And I'm wondering if you cannot address that now, if we can address that in this coming meeting of equity that again, hopefully will take place in the next week.
Honestly, oh, sorry, I just wanted to say I just chatted that to everyone. I've been thinking about that a lot this week, and what, in light of Minneapolis's Parks Board severing their relationship with the police department, I was just hoping to gain more information similar to what you asked, Leslie, about what is the relationship between Parks and Rec and the police department, and also data about what do those interactions between members of our community and Parks and Rec rangers and the police department, what do those look like?
Thank you for articulating that.
I'm glad to gather whatever information we do have. I don't know that we have information based on racial or ethnic identity, but we certainly will be glad to provide feedback our ranger program about what those operations look like and what data we do have.
Thank you, Happy. Okay, so what I'm hearing is there's a special meeting that we'd like to have within before the 19th of June, right? So that's, well, actually before the 17th of June. That would be 1 week. Does that sound right? And do people feel that they can schedule something if we had, I'm going to say, a 2-hour meeting facilitated?
I sure do wish we could be in person. These conversations are difficult to have, and it's nice to be face to face, but I understand it will probably be like this. But what if I would propose that just next Wednesday, maybe at the same time.
Yeah, and I bet it will go over 2 hours. And so we should all
start earlier. Yeah.
Start earlier.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we do this?
A secretary, pay somebody, because I can't take notes for that meeting.
Right, we need everybody's participation. So we do need the facilitator and someone else to help with the notes so that we can all participate in the conversation.
Also, I really want this to not be a one-time meeting. I see this going on, you know. We're not going to be able to solve everything in 1 2-hour meeting. It should be something that we go forward with. So I want to allow for that caution. And then one last thing. Yeah, one last thing. I will be forwarding the report on the wildlife management to everyone because I just received it today. And that's why you all didn't get it, but everybody will get it. It'll also be on the website, and so will the people who commented today.
Okay, so
Marla, and David, I have to be out of town. I would try to go somewhere where there's Wi-Fi, but I don't know by next Wednesday. And I just wondered, when you guys do a retreat, is there a requirement to take minutes, or is this just more free flowing? So we can have the whole board participate without minutes.
I think that's why we have a facilitator and staff support. Happy graciously offered to have staff support us with this and facilitators. So I think that's part of the reason. So if I may suggest that what we do moving forward is to, again, lean on staff to help us with a doodle poll to find the best time in the next week to have this meeting. I understand it might take more than 2 hours. I would suggest that people don't pay attention longer than 2 hours, especially on a call like this. So there may be future meetings that do need to be set up, and I would fully anticipate that to be the case. And then we will work with the staff to come up with a appropriate facilitator. Is there somebody who can volunteer to help vet a facilitator and decide who we need to bring on and who would be best for this situation?
Yeah, I will coordinate with Happy's resources and get back to either. Maybe just start with you, and then we'll see if we can
Great, David.
bring that forward pretty quickly into a time frame where we can all coalesce.
Is there someone else who would team with David to help select a facilitator and plan this 2-hour meeting?
Marla, if you need help, Dave need help, let me know. This is Florence.
Okay, Florence, thank you.
I think it would be really great to invite Lisa and or Tosh to be part of that selection.
Absolutely. And I committed to reach out to both of them.
Me too.
I will do that. Okay. Is this a need of a formal motion or a vote?
Marla and David, I do just want to chime in here, and Happy and others that have more knowledge should let us know. One thing is any type of open records laws or anything for this type of meeting, that if we do it in 7 days, what type of outreach we need to put out there, things like that. I know it's a little procedural and the conversation's timely, but will it be open to the community? We don't want members of the PRAB feel like I wanted to participate, but I couldn't. The facilitator may not be available in such short notice, although we'll connect David as quickly as possible. Those are things that I just wanted to put out there before we move forward, and to think about. And there's people on this that are much more knowledgeable than I on whether we would have to follow those.
Yeah, you just brought up some great points, and I hadn't thought those through either. Why don't you and I chat tomorrow and see how we can get something initiated and talk through some of the stuff.
And it might have something to do with, I'm trying to remember the PRAB parameters that we used to even have the retreat. So maybe let's look at that and see what allows for the retreat and who's involved with that, because that doesn't involve the public.
It's interesting. I remember at a retreat back in January, we said, shouldn't we do this like twice a year instead of once a year? And look at us now in June saying we need to have like a meeting that's not public where we can get through some really tough things that I think this group is struggling with.
Yes, that'd be great. I think if you open it to the public and have a lot of comments, then you don't get to talk and we'll never get to our end point.
So let me suggest this then, because I do think we may run into some issues around the public meeting there's no timing issue. And Jesus, you might have to correct me. I don't think the PRAB bylaws that you have a like a 30-day requirement or anything. I think you're an advisory board, so it's within your parameters or prerogative to meet whenever and wherever you'd like. I think there is an expectation, given the fact that it is while advisory, it is a statutory sort of what would be considered a statutory board, and so public being open to the public, unless it was an executive session, which I don't think would be applicable here. We could certainly ask our city attorney to, and we can get you an answer quickly. The other alternative is for you to sort of take this process offline, which you're perfectly as citizens able to do, and I think along the lines of getting on the same page as as individual citizens. I may be misguided. I'm going to ask our attorney to just to say if PRAB members decided to have a meeting on their own about some issues amongst themselves pertaining to race and social justice, are they okay? But it might mean that you have to sort of use your own means to accomplish that. I would still be glad to connect you to some people who might be able to assist from a facilitator perspective. Whether or not we'd be able to use resources for an offline meeting, I don't know.
Yeah.
Get answers to those questions tomorrow and get them to you, and then you guys can kind of decide how you want to proceed.
Yeah, and maybe the attorney knows how the retreat was conducted without public input or whatever.
Well, I think I have a small idea about that. I think it's because we're not talking about specific issues at the retreat. We're talking about ourselves and our board structure.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about things like the goose management program or how DPD and the Rangers are interacting. And I think we should keep those meetings very public, and especially as they pertain to the DPD and the interaction of parks. It's very timely, and I think we should do it quickly and very publicly. And I'll go over the bylaws with Arthur after this, but I don't think there's necessarily a 45-day wait period if we want to talk about.
There's absolutely not a 45-day period, not whatsoever. I know the bylaws pretty well. Yeah.
Okay, well then I think
if we meet as a body, then that needs to be in a public.
Right, but we don't have to give 45 days notice. Then I think we should call quickly a meeting to discuss the interaction of DPD within our Denver parks. God forbid a Black person or a person of color should be called, the police get called on them. When the DPD comes to the park, there isn't always a ranger there. And then what is that interaction like? These are the kind of questions that we need to discuss very publicly, and to know what kind of money is spent in those interactions and what kind of protections we have for Denver Parks users with those interactions, people of color. I think in the very short term, and I think it should be public, and I think it should be separate from what I think Lisa and Tosh are getting at, which is a different discussion in terms of the board equity and the meeting equity.
Are you suggesting 2 meetings?
Agree with that.
Yeah, I know. Are you excited that I'm suggesting 2 meetings? I know it's not fun, but I think they're necessary. And as we've seen tonight, the meetings aren't short. These are really important discussions to be having. And I think some are more timely and immediate than others.
Well, I think these both are the same timeliness. So,
Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put one above the other.
And I will say this, that because it's come up in our committee and our advisory board, we do have an obligation to have a meeting around our advisory board members' concerns. So why don't we let this try to be a 2-part meeting, or my last question was, do we need a motion, and does this need to be voted on by this board, or is this something we can just do?
Just do it.
Just do it. I think so too. I think we all agree this needs to happen.
All right. So
the question is it 1 or 2 meetings?
Well,
and particularly not to make it a formal meeting, you definitely don't want to have a motion to have a meeting that's not a formal meeting.
Okay. So this is Fran. I know there's been comments made by some of us saying that it ought to be more offline and not have the public, but I don't think that's going to fly with Lisa and Tasha. I really don't. So keep that in mind.
I
just have
agree.
no public
I think it
comments,
should be
maybe. Maybe that's more important, is that they're not involved, that they're not commenting. It's not an opportunity for them to be involved, but they can watch.
Right, exactly. So
So
all I'm saying is I'm feeling very sensitive because every time my stuff comes up, I'm the bad guy, and sheesh, I don't know what to do anymore.
And then just acknowledging, Trina, if you want to step in, you had put something in the comment, and if you wanted to.
No, I was just making a comment that when you're discussing any type of race and equity issues, it may give a poor perception that we're trying to hide something if you're not opening that up. And so I suggest that, I agree with not allowing comments, but I do think it should be public.
So thank you for that. Let's let David, Florence, and I'd like to be involved, work with the staff to try and get 1 or 2 meetings scheduled within the next week regarding the 2 issues that are on the table. One is the conduct of the advisory board meetings and the issues that Lisa and Tosh brought up. And the second would be the idea around how our parks are relating to Black lives and diversity issues.
Marla, because of what Leslie said and Taj before, the timeliness, should we do the equity first as quickly as possible, and the Black Lives Matter quicker than the other?
say again what you're suggesting? I'm sorry, Lynn.
Well, it seems like the equity issue and Black Lives Matter, et cetera, and the kinds of questions Leslie was asking and things Tasha and other people have said would take one meeting. And it seems like we should do it that one quicker.
Okay, got it. So the suggestion was that those two were separate things, the interaction with rangers in parks and Black Lives, and then the interaction with the committee and the advisory board was another separate topic.
Right.
Are you suggesting we make them one?
No, I just want to make sure we do the equity issues first. And the
Both
other.
equity issues in my eyes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
One is that you're suggesting we do first, please.
I just figured that the kinds of things that are going on with Black Lives Matter in the public might take quite a bit of time and seem to me the most pressing, but I could be wrong.
Got it. Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you for saying that. Okay, I understand.
Is that so with the conversation or just, Marla, I think you had said earlier how we conduct our, the conduct is around those discussions. Is that part of that discussion? I'm just confused. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it is confusing. Thanks, Flo. What I heard was two separate conversations. The equity conversation around the openness and freedom to speak in our advisory committee board meeting, and another issue that Leslie raised, which is equally important, which is how is it that our parks and our rangers are interacting with people and diverse people in real time in parks.
Okay.
So I heard two issues.
One is more public versus the interaction within the board.
Certainly. I would say one is not less important than the other, however.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's important to just remember what Lisa and Tosh were asking about, and that was can we produce a statement regarding Black Lives Matter and make that a PRAB statement. So I think that's important to include that second part, not the board conduct necessarily, but how those ranges and things like that.
Okay, so I'm gonna just let us, I think if it's okay with this board, the smaller group can work with the staff to figure out what a time would be in the next week. And if there's any rules around that, if we can have that meeting, and if it's supported by staff.
And I might make a suggestion to piggyback on the one I made earlier. Getting a facilitator to help you sort through what conversation you need to have when.
Thank you.
Okay. These are tough, and it's hard to know what first step to take. And I think I've heard several of you say, rightfully so, that this isn't one conversation, it's an ongoing conversation.
Yes. So
the important question is, where do we start? And in one meeting, how much can we get accomplished? And so my strong recommendation is that you lean on advice from a facilitator, having heard and seen what was proposed and what wasn't, because there was a lot going on, and you may not in one meeting get it all done, but you need to start, and you're all committed to do it. And so maybe just relying on some guidance from that individual about where to start and what your first meeting will contain might be the way to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good.
That's okay with the group. Let's go with that suggestion, and we will keep the board informed. Thank you. Sound good?
So are we okay
Any
with,
other
in
business?
the short term, and I do mean the immediate, are we okay communicating by email? Is everybody going to be able to keep up with that in the next day or two? Or do I have to start making phone calls? I need to make sure we have a way to get to people and to get input and et cetera. And by the way, this has been said more than once tonight. It's like, well, it's kind of nice to hear what everybody else is saying. I can't do that unless we have a group phone call. So I still kind of propose, if we can make email work, then we can all kind of keep up with what everybody else is thinking.
I think the request is please answer your email, look at your email. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you.
At least to start.
Sure.
Yeah, at least to get going. I mean, yeah.
Let's try email first.
Thank you.
If you have
Is there any other business?
Yeah, Marla, if you have the small group and working with Happy and a facilitator to get it set up, then we will commit to follow the email on dates and whether we can be present. Because I do think that was really helpful advice from both of you.
Thank you, Lynn. David, any other business?
I don't think anything else is that important tonight unless anybody has a specific board announcement that's pressing. No? Okay.
My only request is, David, if you're hearing from Noel, that you keep us posted. I'll definitely email Noel, but do let us know how he's doing if he contacts you, okay?
You have his number. I think you ought to give him a call.
Oh, he just got out of the hospital. I'm just saying if he reaches out to you again, to share that with us again. Thank you.
This is Florence, just something really quick. Somebody hacked into one of my accounts and sent out something that using similar email address that I have, sending to whoever I've been emailing to for the last maybe 2 years. I have no clue. But if any of you receive it, please know it's a hoax. I am not requesting any money from anybody to buy an e-card for $200 or $300. So please, I apologize for that, but wanted to bring it to your attention because it's not a real email. Thank you, and I'm sorry I had to bring this up. I really am.
It's okay. It's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to bring this to a close. Happy, thank you and to your staff for hanging in there and sticking with us another long slug. I think that'll do. Thank you again, and everyone have a good and safe night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.